Hey guys, welcome back. It's Gina. I am back here with my contents of the recent Sam's bead box laid out in Moonlit Serenade. And I got to starting to play with these items as they were on my bead mat, and I came up with a little bead embroidery piece. And I hope you like it. I am new to bead embroidery, and I really have been enjoying playing around with these beads, especially what came in the recent Sam's bead box. So I want to show you just briefly the contents here, pretty much laid out. And as I was playing around with the items here, I was kind of like, what can I do as far as stringing or bead weaving? And what caught my eye was some of these larger flat beads, like this coin right here in particular, and there's two of those. So I thought I would show you kind of my process and how I went about embroidering this, especially if you're newer. So to preface this video, obviously I'm not an expert in embroidery, but I have picked up a lot of tips and tricks along the way, and I hope to share some of those with you and also just inspire you. If you've never tried embroidery before, just dig in and try it out. It's a lot of fun if you just play around and, see what you come up with. So a couple of these other beads here may be good candidates for embroidery, like these flat ones here, those beautiful roses. You can bead around those. Think of those like a cabochon. Also, these little star and moon beads, those caught my eye. A nice flat bead here, and maybe doing some smaller designs in sequence and creating a bracelet. And then also we have these really cool crescent moons in the shell and the little crescent shape there. We also have some leaves, lots of flat beads that have some really beautiful shapes that you can think about maybe using in a new way. So to work on our embroidery today, all you need is some simple fabric, like a felt, something like this. There's also a fabric called Lacey's Stiff Stuff, and a lot of bead embroiderers love to use that. I've found that a felt fabric like this works just fine. Anything that's not going to unravel on you and fray, but also allow you to pass your bead through really easily. Something like this works good. I happen to have a bunch of this from BB Craft from a few years ago, and it's high time I start using it, so I pulled some of that out. And also, you can use Fireline, but I also have some of this Nymo beading thread, which comes in so many different colors, and I like that for embroidery because you can match this to whatever you're working on, and you can find some really interesting shades and colors. I happen to have one in this taupe color, kind of a light neutral, but it kind of goes with both the yellows and a little bit of the gray tones that I have going on. So I pulled that to use as well, trying to use some of the things I have. And in addition to that, I'll be backing this with some Ultrasuede, which I had gotten from Eureka Crystal Beads a while back in one of their collections. You can see how that finishes the back off of the embroidery so beautifully. And besides what came in Sam's bead box, as far as the beads go, I just pulled some size 11/0 round seed beads from my stash to use to finish the outer edge of this in brick stitch, also to create a really simple bail. And we will be using some of those in the center in square stitch to set off that round coin bead there. So if you'd like to get started or just see what I'm doing, see what I'm up to, and watch me as I put this together, I will be using very similar beads as to this example, but I don't have enough of these yellow ones, so I'll probably substitute something else, maybe the gray ones for those. So if you'd like to, you can gather up some materials. If not, just hop along with me and we'll jump into this tutorial. All right, so I'm going to be using a size 11 beading needle today, and I just trimmed off a comfortable length. I'm talking about like 4 feet of this thread to use. I don't want too much because it's just, you know, when you start pulling and pulling and pulling your thread, you just want about a comfortable length, like 4 or 5 feet, a wingspan. That ends up being better, I feel. So trim that off, thread your beading needle. You can start to gather up some of your beads, specifically that larger coin or whatever it is you want to bead around. You can use a very similar process. And I've also trimmed a square of the felt fabric. You can see I've left enough of an allowance around the original pendant that I used. And I'd say this is probably about 4 inches square. So trim off enough so you have extra. And then I found that it's very helpful if you just go ahead and round out the corners of the fabric that you're using, especially as you're pulling the thread. It won't snag on the edges quite so much, which is cool. So if you want to do that, you can just round out the corners with a nice sharp pair of scissors meant for fabric. Once you've done that, our first step is to take our large focal bead and to sew it or tack it down in the center of that. So I'm going to just move some of these beads out of the way and everything. That way we can work on getting started with our embroidery. All right, all I'm gonna do first is just hold this bead in place with my thumb, and I've got my other fingers there on the back of the fabric, just holding those two together, and I'm gonna bring my needle up close to the hole there in front of that bead and just pull my thread, leaving myself a little bit of a tail. We're gonna end up sewing over that and maybe making a knot to hold that in place. But right now we're just holding all this with our fingers, going through that coin bead, and then just situating that bead so that the thread there where we started is matching up with the hole, holding that in place, and then returning down through the fabric on the other side, just as close as you can to the hole location of that bead. And pull this so that you're coming out of the other side, and you can see there, that's where we started. And I think what I'm gonna do is just sew underneath that large bead like that to get a little loop started over top of that tail thread, just to start to tack that down. We don't want anything bulky there behind the bead, but that's just a little single knot to get us started. And why not? I may just do an overhand knot right there too. There's so many different ways to do things in embroidery, which is one of the fun things about it. That's gonna be a little bit loose, but we're gonna keep sewing over that, and so it's gonna be tacked down pretty quickly. So what I'm gonna do now is just reinforce this. I'm gonna bring my needle up in front of that bead again, pulling that thread tight, and then I'm gonna sew through the bead, and I'll probably do this a couple of times. Just going down through the fabric on the other side, pulling that tight. And let's do this one more time. Coming up in front of the hole. And then sewing through the bead. And just returning down. Just in that general vicinity, because we're going to be covering up anything that you see here with our beads anyway. We're going to start with our 11 O's, which I need to go grab. And there's a look at what we have. But all of this is going to be covered up so we don't need to worry about how that looks back there. So right now, after you've gotten your focal bead in place, you can go ahead and grab some 11/0 seed beads, and we're going to do a little square stitch bezel around that bead. All right, so starting with my thread coming up right here, which is just to the right of the hole of that main bead, and just slightly out from that, but not much. Let's just go ahead and add these beads a couple at a time. Let's just go with 3. And if you're newer, you just want to string those down and allow those beads to sit where they're going to sit, going back to where your thread had started, making sure you don't have a bunch of space where they're wobbling around. And just take your needle and then go down through the fabric right after those first 3 beads, getting them to sit in place. Then you can take your needle and come back up right behind those beads, behind that very first one you added, and then sew through the 3 beads again. This will start to get those to straighten up a little bit, and 2 or 3, maybe 4 beads at a time usually works best. We're just going to go with 3 right now. So I've gone through those 3 and reinforced them. I'm going to pick up 3 new ones and allow those to drop right next to the other 3. And without leaving any gaps, I'm going to sew directly down through the fabric where my thread is coming out. Pull that, and then take your needle and come up through the fabric right behind those 3 beads you just added and return through those 3. Pulling that tight and scooching those over, and you can see how it's starting to wrap those beads around that coin. So we're going to keep doing that in little groups of 3. Pulling those in place. Coming up behind those 3 and then sewing through them like that. So I love bead weaving, but I find that with embroidery, I can be even more creative. It's also a little bit more freeform. It's kind of relaxing. There's really no right or wrong way, and there's lots of ways you can incorporate so many different types of beads in an interesting way to get this, whatever visual effect you're going for. So if you haven't tried it, definitely don't be afraid to mess around with it. I did have several variations going on this pendant before I committed to the one I have back here. You just have to see what you like, and you know, I ended up taking apart several different types that I started with because I felt like every time I added something, it helped me to see what I might like to do that was even better. But it was just a process of getting in there and playing around first to just kind of get a feel for what I liked. So we're going to do this all the way around this coin bead, getting 1 layer of seed beads to surround what we have here. And you don't have to worry about if it's an odd or even number, or really what the count is on these seed beads at all. That's another cool thing about the embroidery. It's not quite as precise. Can be as precise as you make it. Going back here. So we're about halfway around. And this is just making a foundation for our square stitch. So after we have the first row done, we'll go back and add one more row on top of that to give this a little bit more height, because that coin bead sticks up a little bit more, and I just happen to like framing that out that way. As I'm doing this too, if you're curious about Sam's bead box, you can check out the unboxing that I just recently shared, and you can find the link for that and the coupon code down below the video. It's coupon Orchid. It'll save you $5 off your first box. And I'm not sure if you'll be able to get your hands on any of this Moonlit Serenade February box, but if you sign up by the 9th of March, I believe you'll get your hands on the March box. So check out those links and things below. Check out their website for more details. And I also have a playlist for Sam's if you want to see lots of unboxings going back over the previous few years. And I can tell you, in my experience, they've got lots of different styles and shapes of beads, especially Czech glass, that are a lot of fun and very interesting, would make great potential candidates for bead embroidery, because I think that's one way that you can really enjoy and show off those pressed glass beads with the interesting patterns and shapes, and create these little miniature pieces of art with those. All right, so keep going this way, adding in your 11 O's, and once you've done that, we'll meet back and I'll show you how to add another row on top. All right, so my first row, it just so happens that adding 3 final beads is the right count. And to finish that, I'm just ending that first row by putting my needle down right in front of where we started. I'm gonna go back through the 3 beads I just added, and I'm gonna sew through that very first bead on the bottom row to start out our square stitch. So coming out of that bead, what I'm gonna do is pick up a new 11-0, and I'm just gonna sew through the same bead that I'm coming out of plus the next one. So it's kind of like just doing any other square stitch like this, except we're attaching it to that backing. So coming out of this bead, we'll pick up a new one, go back through the new bead that's sticking up, and we're gonna sew through the adjacent 2 beads plus one more. All right, so one of my beads down here was actually having an issue. There was something wrong with the hole and I couldn't pass through it like I was able to with the other beads. I don't think these are Miyuki seed beads. I just pulled them and I have no idea. But anyway, just to give you an example of, you know, the free-form nature of bead embroidery, I ended up cracking that bead, got rid of it, and I was able to spread out these beads around the coin to where you can't even really tell that that one's missing. So I'm just going to keep going at this point with my bezel and hope that that doesn't happen again. But that brings me to a good point that I recommend using Miyuki or Toho seed beads that are more uniform, higher quality, or even Czech seed beads, the Preciosa, that just have a more uniform nature to them. I think I grabbed these and they're ones I've just had for a long time. which is fine. Just be aware that that could happen. And if you need to, you can always switch to a size 12 beading needle, which will make it easier to pass through your beads. But just keep going with your square stitch, adding in this extra row. And once we get closer to the beginning again, these beads will start to stack on top of each other and create that second row there. And we'll reinforce those and bring them together. But for now, just work on getting your beads in place one at a time. Take your time and just enjoy this process. So just keep going. I'll meet you back once we get back to the beginning. Alrighty, so I'm back to the beginning here and we can start to connect this together. I just went ahead and went through that beginning bead again and then up through the one adjacent to that on the top section, and I'm going to continue in that same direction, just sewing through all of these seed beads to just bring this together into a complete joined ring. And just use your fingers to kind of spread those seed beads out so they're even as you go, and just go through a few beads at a time. I did end up switching to a size 12 beading needle. I found that to be easier for me with this. I think also just the Nymo beading thread, I'm not used to using that with the beading that I usually do. And I also didn't condition my thread, so I didn't wax it or anything, and that can cause the thread to just kind of be a little bit looser and take up a little bit more space, which is fine. But that size 12 beading needle definitely helped me out just to pass along that tip. But there you can see we've got that neat row of beads surrounding our coin. And this is a great start for a bead embroidery piece where we can just add beads around that. And what I did next was I pulled 2 of those rice beads, which you can see here from the Sam's bead box. They've got the little starburst design on them. And I went ahead and put those in place and centered those along with the whole location on the coin beads, because I like this kind of half and half design, and that gave a more clear starting and stopping point for the rest of the design that I was doing. So I am just gonna actually take my needle. I'm gonna go down through the little section right next to where I'm coming out, in between the seed beads and the coin beads, just bringing my thread down there so I can pop right back up next to the seed beads. And I want to be coming out in line with the hole. I just think it happened to look nice lining up with that when I added the little rice beads in. So I'm going to take one and pull that down and let that sit right there next to the seed bead section in line how I want it. And I'm just going to return with my needle down through the fabric, gently pulling that in place. I'm going to let it sit so that there's a little starburst design facing up. And then I'm going to come up through the back of the fabric again, right in front of that rice bead. And this time I'm going to sew through the rice bead, sew through the seed bead bezel. I'm not even going through any of those beads, I'm just going right in between. And then come out of the other side. And don't pull any of this too tight, but just tight enough so that everything's in place. So we've got one rice bead, and then I'm going to put another one on the other side. So I'm going to pick that up. And that one's got a clogged hole, so I'll get a different one. There's plenty. And I'm going to drop that in. And once again, just trying to get that kind of in a straight line for the design I'm going for, and letting that sit so that one of the starbursts is sitting up. And then I'm going to take my needle and then go down through the fabric right next to that bead in front of the hole. And I'll pull that in place. And I'm going to pop back up in front of that rice bead, going through that bead again, through the coin, and I'm going to come out of the other side but not go through that rice bead. I think I'm going to just go down through the fabric, and for where we want to start next, one of those little stripes of beads that starts at the rice bead, I'm going to come up just to the left of that and maybe a seed bead's length in front of the bezel. And here I'm going to start using some of these little light blue rondelles. And we're going to start adding those in just around 1/2 of the pendant. And we're going to situate them snugly against the seed beads. And just like we did before, we'll just go a couple at a time. We can do 3 at a time. That seemed to work pretty well. So I'm going to pick up 3 of those and let them drop down on my thread, sitting close up to the rice bead and also to those seed beads. And I'm going to take my needle and sew right down through the fabric directly after the hole and pull. So that's how we're starting that little stripe. And then we're going to pop up right in front of those 3 beads we just added, in between those and the rice bead, to sew through those 3 beads again so we can start adding some more. Pull that tight and then scoot those in place gently. All right, ready for 3 more. Just letting those sit. Once you're happy with the placement, taking your needle and going right down. There we go. Come up through here. And then go back through those 3, like that. And from the first pendant, I know that about 15 of those seem to fit very well. So we've got 6 in place. We're gonna do 3 more groups of 3. And we've got just about enough room for 3 more. Dropping those in. And that's exactly what we want, just enough to fit snug right against that other rice bead. So I'm just going down there next to that. And then I'm going to secure those final 3 rondelles in place. Holding that tight and just gently making sure everything's sitting how I want it and feels tacked down. So that's what we have so far. And there's a little look at the back, which we're not that concerned about. And what we're gonna do now is just go back down next to where we're coming out and pop back up right next to that rice bead, but on the other side, so that we can add our next row of beads in place on the other side. And I am going to work with some of those small faceted crystals. I only have 5 of the yellow ones left, but I think because I can see I used 10 here, every other one I'm going to use, I will use a yellow and I will combine them with some of the labradorite, and we'll see how that comes out. Actually, I used 11, so I'm going to start with a labradorite, but every other one will be one of those yellow cubic zirconias. So, a labradorite, and then yellow. It's really hard for me to see those holes, but I'll get there. And a lab. So I'm going to just bring those 3 down. And we're going to do this just like we did with the blue rondelles. This time I'm going to start with the yellow. And I'm just going to go down behind the rice bead. And there's our next row in place. And we're ready to start working with some of our fire polish beads. I'm just going to continue on that same side. I think I'm going to come right up next to the race bead right there, where I'm going to start using some of those light blue fire polished beads. Let's grab some of those. All right, with these fire polished, I'm going to just add these one bead at a time. You're welcome to do a couple at a time. They're just a little bit bigger and wider, so I'm just going to take my time. But we're just following that same process. Going back behind the bead and going through it to get that in place and pulling before we add our next one, and just getting those to sit snug against the row of beads that we already have as we go. All right, now I only have a little bit of thread left, so I'm just gonna pop up through that last section and then turn back and sew through all these fire polish just to bring those together and finish using this little bit of thread that I have before starting a new one. Going through that last fire polish. That just helps those beads, being that they're a little tiny bit larger, stay into place. And I'm going to go down through the fabric right next to the rice bead. And I'm going to flip this over, and to finish off this piece of thread, just underneath the coin, I'm going through the fabric like that, make a little loop, and then just tie a knot. My thread decided it wanted to come right off the needle, so we're going to go with that. And you can just tie a little knot there, and I'm going to trim my excess a little bit more. And you can use a thread burner if you want to secure that into place a little bit better, or as you use some more thread, you can just sew over what you already have and it'll stay in place. So here's what we have so far, and we are going to continue with another row on the other side. So let me get some of those beads together and I will be right back. All right, for finishing off this piece in that last row, so I don't have enough of the yellow cubic zirconia to finish like exactly like this first piece. So I'm just playing around with what I have left in the Sam's bead box. We still have some of the labradorite and some of those aquamarine, I think it was, those bluish ones there that are in the same size as the yellow that I could use. I could use either color or alternate those. I also brought in some more of those rice beads just to see what I think of those, maybe staggered with some of the labradorite on this outer row. So I'm not quite sure I'm sold on that. Could also do 3 of those instead of 5. It's a little bit heavier looking than the other side in the blue for the design. That's just kind of what I'm thinking just at first glance. And I'm not sure if I like that so much. I think I like just having the rice beads at the poles there at the top and bottom. So I'll probably leave it at that. And then I might just use some either all lab or alternate these 2 beads around the side. I brought in these yellow fire polish because I really would like to add a little bit more yellow to the side since we have some here, but they're just a little big. If I have those sitting here, you can see they're gonna make this side a little bit larger, and I kind of just want this pendant to be more of a pretty symmetrical circle for the most part. So that's why I don't think I'm gonna go with those, but you're welcome to if you want to make your piece with those. Sky's the limit, and that's totally up to you. That's just a personal preference. So I think just to give you an example of how you can kind of start to play around with the beads and lay things out before you actually tack anything down, I think that helped me to decide that I'm gonna go with the labradorite. We have a lot of blue going on, so maybe I'll just keep it simple and do a row of the gray. And we'll just go with that for now. So I'm going to move all the other beads out of the way, and I do need to grab a new piece of thread and probably a new needle because that one's pretty bent up. So let me go ahead and take care of that, and I will be right back and we'll continue on with our next row. All right, so coming up right here, ready to start that last row, and I'll just go with 3 beads at a time. All right, in that case, I wanted to finish up with one more to get us up to the rice bead again. And I'm going to sew down right next to that. And pop up through the section next to the last bead and go through that one. And pull. And I'm going to go down next to the rice bead again. And come up next to that. And I'm just going to sew through all of those labradorite beads again in that single row to just get a good even tension on all of those beads going around. Just going through a few at a time. Whatever my needle wants to get through at once. Using my fingers to just smooth that out. And then I'm gonna go right down next to that bead and behind the rice bead. And all of our beads now are in place for the front of our pendant. Okay, so at this time I want to get rid of this working thread that we currently have coming out, and I'm just going to gather up some of these loose threads. If there's any way we can sew over those while we complete this thread, that would be great. Might be able to bring in a couple of those loose ones. I'm just going to sew through the fabric behind the coin bead, make a little knot right there, and I'll do another one next to that. And again, this will all be covered up, and we're going to use a little glue as well. So you don't want anything bulky, just enough to finish off that thread so everything stays in place for now. And then we're going to trim that, and I will show you what to do next with the backing. All right, so at this point you can take some scissors. Hopefully you have something that's sharp and will work good for fabric for some of these finer detailed spots. And you want to go in, and these scissors are not very good. In fact, I think I'm gonna I don't recommend using scissors that are this massive for this project, but that's what I'm gonna do here. That's what I have, and this is what happens to work well on this felt for me right now. I'm gonna actually cut very carefully right up to the beads, leaving maybe a seed bead's width next to all of those, going around, trimming that excess felt before we do anything with the backing, just getting that general shape in place. But you can see I'm leaving just a tiny bit of that felt, and I may actually trim more of that as we match this up with our backing. But the main thing being just get rid of most of that and don't go over any spots where you sew. Don't get too close to the beads, but you don't want to have much of this left around. But that's a good place to start. Or we can bring in some of this Ultrasuede. You can even use just more of the same type of felt material on the back if you want. But since I have this and I like the color with it, I'm going to use some of that. Ultrasuede is really such a good fabric for that. And I'm going to just trim off just pretty much exactly what I need there. Got the back of that facing up, For now, I'm just gonna trim off a little square, and I can get more precise as I go. Actually, before I get any more precise, this would be a good point for us to add a little bit of glue. You can use E6000 if you have that, or another fabric safe sturdy glue. I'm actually gonna use a little bit of tacky glue because that's what I have, and an orange stick, a little wooden stick to spread that out. Let me go grab those. Okay, so I'm just gonna spread a little bit of this tacky glue on the back. And then taking my orange stick here, I'm gonna spread this so it's not as globby. And it's a little more even. Just going towards the edges, but you don't need to go on the edges because we're gonna sew this all together anyway. This is also a point where you can use a little bit of cardboard. I've even heard of people cutting up a plastic milk jug and using that material in bead embroidery to make whatever you're working on a little bit more stiff and sturdy. But since this is a small piece, I don't feel personally that we really need anything extra going on back there. But if you did, you are welcome to do that. Once you've got your glue spread out, you can just gently place your beadwork onto your backing fabric, and I've got the back of that facing up so that our nice smoother side is on the bottom here. Just gonna give that a couple minutes to adhere a little bit more, but I'm not gonna give it that long to dry. I'm gonna let that happen as time goes on, but we're gonna be just going in and sewing around the edges here pretty soon. But this at least gets those two layers to start to stick together so that when we go back in for that final trim with our scissors, our edges will be nice and matched up and neat so we can do some brick stitching around those. So just press this together. And give that a couple minutes, and then we'll go back in with our scissors. All right, I'm just going back in, just gently trimming that Ultrasuede layer to match up with what we already have at the felt. So we've got our little bead embroidery sandwich here. And we can just make some final cuts if we want to, if there's any areas that look like we could go in a little bit closer. Because you don't want to see any of that felt really. But you do need enough to sew up through when you're doing the brick stitch. By the way, if any of you have any great bead embroidery tips to share, I'd love to hear about them, and others probably would too down in the comments. Especially if you have some more experience, you can share those ideas down below. Not just for me, but for others who are trying to learn a little bit more about these techniques, and there's just so many out there, and that would be great if you want to share. One tip would be to find a smaller pair of scissors that are also sharp to do the job I'm doing right now. but we're not going to talk about that, right? It's okay. Pretty good. I think I'm pretty happy with this. I think it's got a nice round shape for being something that I just kind of eyeballed. And this is where we can bring back in our 11-0 seed beads. Move some of this lint out of the way. And I still have some of that working thread on my needle left. And I was watching a couple videos on Eureka Crystal Beads channel, specifically Aga. She does some great bead embroidery work, and one tip I got from her was you can burn the end of your thread just a little bit into more of like that little larger, like little ball shape there, and you can actually hide that in between the layers as you're getting your brick stitch started. So I just took a little torch and made a little rougher burned area back there. And I'm gonna start by just taking my needle, going through the layers and poking my needle up through the back. And as I pull this, just letting that little burned tip sit there, just gonna help it along to go a little bit toward the center of the piece like that, so we can get started with our brick stitch. But we have that at least coming out toward the edge of our Ultrasuede back there. I'm still gonna hold that in place as we go. And we're gonna start by picking up 2 of our seed beads. You can also see I started about a seed beads journey away from that rice bead. I'm gonna use that as my guide, which is gonna be the top of the pendant. So I'll just go ahead and bring those down. And then I'm gonna sew through the front of the pendant, going through the felt and then back through the suede, just making sure my needle is just coming out kind of even with where the other spot is back there, and just pulling those 2 beads into place that are sitting on the edge. And then I'll take my needle and I'm going to go up through that first bead that's closest to me, just like that. And that's our first bead in place. And this is where you want to just be extra slow and steady as you go. I'm picking up a new bead and I'm gonna sew through the Ultrasuede and through the felt, 1 seed bead distance away from where I'm coming up. And I'm trying to get the needle to pierce through the fabric so that it creates a nice even circle around the piece. So just take your time to create a nice finished edge. Just going up through that bead, pulling tight, and then picking up a new one. Once again, just going through the suede and the felt about 1 seed bead away and just checking where your needle's going through. Pulling that onto the edge and then sewing up through that new bead. And they're just gonna sit right next to each other like that. I could have even probably gone a little bit closer with cutting my felt, but that's all right. So picking up a new bead, sewing through those. and pulling. Actually, this is probably a little bit more helpful so you can see what I'm doing. And I'm just gonna speed up the video, and you'll do this all the way around, but that's a look at what it looks like on the back so far. Just keeping those stitches as even as possible and bringing the fabric and everything together. All right, I'm adding my final bead in here, I think. Yeah, I'm just gonna bring these last two here together. That's the first one that we added that didn't really get secured down. I'm gonna go down through that one and go through the front of the fabric, going towards the back on this one, like that. and then up through that bead above. I'm going to go down through the one next to that, going toward the front. And then if you have extra thread at this point, you can make a little bail like I did using the same 11-0 seed beads. And I just did one really simple using herringbone stitch, and I tacked down 2 beads to get started over top of the central rice bead there, which happened to be kind of in the center of 3 seed beads. So I centered 2 seed beads on top of those 3 there. So I have hardly any thread left, but maybe I can get this started. Let's see. That would be the central seed bead. And we can come down out of that one on the left, going up through that one on the right, skipping the one in the center. That's kind of how I started it. And then picked up 2 seed beads, going down through that 3rd seed bead there, going back up through that 3rd one and up through that new herringbone stitch, and pulling tight. So that just giving a little spot there as a foundation to start a little bail if you want to, that's centered over the rice bead, and you can just keep going, making yourself a little strip there that I would need to add on some thread to do to continue, but this at least gives you an idea of how you could start doing something like that. I've got some of the same kinds of bails, are really simple and herringbone, done in some other tutorials, but basically just created a strip just like that, 2 beads at a time, that I then brought together in the back and joined into the same 2 seed beads where I started back there. And that is that. And then after that, I just trimmed off my working thread after weaving that through enough times that I felt like that was secure, and that completed this pendant. Alright guys, so there is our beadwork. There is a look at the back. You can see how that comes together really nicely with the brick stitch on the edges. Just one way you can finish off a piece like that. And I really hope you enjoyed this adventure into bead embroidery with me. It was really fun to sit down and do something a little different today, and hopefully this inspires you to get into trying that if you haven't already and you've been thinking about it. Maybe gives you another idea of what to do with some of the beautiful beads that come in Sam's bead box, which don't forget I have linked down below, as well as that coupon code ORCHID if you'd like to save $5 off your first box. And I'd love to hear in the comments if you decide to give this a try, so leave me a comment down below as well. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I hope to see you guys again real soon. Until next time, have a wonderful rest of your day, and as always, happy beading.